Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this regular meeting of the Madera City Council. Can I have roll call, please?
Mayor Andrew Medellin.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem C.C. Foley Gallegos. Here. Councilmember Jose Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Donald Hawley.
Present.
Councilmember Derek Robinson.
Present.
Councilmember Will Oliver.
Here.
And Councilmember Charles Rigby.
Here.
Thank you so much, Sonia. With us this evening from Yosemite Christian Center is Pastor Tim McGraw. If everyone will stand with me for the invocation. Pastor Tim, thank you.
Lord, we really thank you for the statement, "In God we trust," on the wall as part of the logo of our city. I just thank you for your blessing over our city. Thank you for your favor. I thank you, Lord, for what you're going to do tonight. Thank you for wisdom. We ask for it. We depend on it. Bless our businesses. Let them prosper. Our schools, let them be united. Our citizens, Lord, let them be secure. We just ask for your continued grace. Thank you for all of it. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Tim, very much. If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Ready, salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first 15 minutes of the meeting are reserved for members of the public to address the council on items which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers will be asked to identify themselves and state the subject of their comment. If the subject is an item on the agenda, the mayor has the option of asking the speaker to hold the comment until that item is called. Comments on items listed as public hearing on the agenda should be held until the hearing is opened. The council is prohibited by law from taking any action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda, and no adverse conclusion should be drawn if the council does not respond to public comment at that time. Is there anybody wishing to speak under this definition of public comment?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. My name is John Anderson. I'm here representing Senator Anthony Cannella. I just want to let you know that we're still around. The state has now got a budget. They are still manipulating with add-ons and subtractions and everything, even though the governor has in fact signed the whole budget. So if you have any questions on that, I don't think I can answer them. What I did want to come in and say is that in Sacramento, they read someplace that your meetings are going to be videotaped and televised and all that. And they wanted me to come down and make sure that this was an opportunity for me to announce to the public, not only the few here, but the thousands that will be watching on the videotape and the television, that we hold what's called mobile district offices. And that's kind of an outreach program like the Cops and Donuts thing, where the people come in and talk to us, and they can, find out what we know, and if they need anything from the senator, we pass it up to them. We hold them at the library here, and our next one, and I know I'm a little bit in advance, but it'll be on September the 5th from 10 until 11 o'clock here at the Madera Library.
Great.
Thank you. Also, I wanted to just make a comment. Since my new job, I go to about 10 cities, and I just want to compliment city government. For 16 years, I sat and watched the county government in operation, and you guys are so much more efficient and businesslike that I'm probably out of place commenting like that, but it's true.
Well, thank you.
And it's due to you, Mayor, and your predecessor, Mr. Poitras. So
We have a great team up here, too, on the dais. Thank you so much for John. I really appreciate that. And next time you speak up, I'll look right into that camera when you say it. Thank you very much for those comments. John, it's always good to see you. Anybody else wishing to speak under this definition of public comment, please come forward. And as a reminder, give us your name and address, please.
My name is Humberto Avila, and I own a property on 118 North K Street and 118 and a half. And I received a letter regarding the construction on the big lot that is close to my property, and I want to know my options, because I'm going to be sandwiched between apartment complex and offices, and I'm going to be the only one residential, and I want to know what are my options.
Um,
Public hearing on that for
That is on,
C1.
we have that on the agenda tonight, sir. And so when that item comes up, you will certainly have all the time you need to ask any questions, and we'll have staff answer those questions for you. Right now, during public comment, are items that are not on the agenda. So when we call that item, I'll make sure to signal you so you can come back up and we'll discuss it at that time.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you very much. I'm glad you're here. Anybody else wishing to speak during public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment and ask our city clerk for an announcement.
Thank you, Mayor. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54957, members of the public are advised that documents related to the following agenda item were distributed to the council less than 72 hours before this meeting. Under Section C, Hearings, Petitions, and Bids, item C2, subject matter is a resolution adopting the 2017-2018 budget. A revised resolution was distributed to the council this evening. Extra copies are available at the podium for members of the public wishing a copy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sonia. Moving into the consent calendar, I will ask any of my colleagues if they want to pull any item on the consent for any further discussion, answer any questions. If not, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second. The consent calendar has been properly moved and seconded. As presented, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much for that. Item C1, a public hearing and consideration of introduction of an ordinance rezoning approximately 0.69 acres of property located in proximity to the northwest corner of West Yosemite Avenue and North K.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mayor.
Boyle.
Council, our first item tonight is indeed a rezone of property located on the northwest corner of K and West Yosemite here in the fair city of Madera. The property is currently vacant, although my historical photographs show that over time 3 individual residences were removed. The last one about 10 years ago. The current zoning on the property is R1, low-density residential, and that's consistent with the historical evolution of the West Yosemite neighborhood, the Hughes neighborhood, which is predominantly single-family residential in character. You might note that the parcels immediately to the northwest of the site, as our citizen noted, there's an apartment complex at the north end of the block, and his particular property, which is currently zoned R2. The general plan designations on the property, though, are professional office zone property. They're queued in and were adopted in relationship with the West Yosemite Professional Office Overlay Zone, which requires that a rezone be completed, and then development must occur as a component of a conditional use permit. The Planning Commission is currently agendized for next week to see the development of this particular site, which will include the conditional use permit, which guides the conversion of the property from a residential property into a professional office property, consistent with the development standards of the West Yosemite Overlay. The overlay was established in 1984. It functions largely as a zone district, though, with its own set of development criteria. And its purpose and intent was to guide this logical conversion of properties along the West Yosemite corridor into a professional office setting, mindful that not all properties could be converted because of their dimensions or just development constraints, like the existing residence wouldn't accommodate a driveway and the like. So the rezone request would provide for the conversion of the existing residential land to an office use. I noted the Planning Commission is going to be visiting this project next week on the 11th, and this is a general site plan which shows the development of just shy of an 8,000 square foot office complex with parking. I note that the property to the north, as many sites in the West Yosemite office overlay, is designed to have a minimal impact upon the existing residences by providing a parking field to the rear component of the property, as opposed to a structure in close proximity abutting to a residential use. I'll tease you with some elevations, contemporary office elevations, which provide for consistency with the general plan's development guidelines and the land use element of the general plan. And with that, I would close by saying the Planning Commission and staff recommended that the council, after considering public testimony, introduce the ordinance rezoning the subject properties. That completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boyle. Any questions regarding item C1? Thank you very much. At this time, I'll open up the public hearing. And Mr. Avila, I'm not sure if he answered your questions or not, if you wanted to come back up to the podium.
Yeah, I'm going to go back.
Please do. And if you don't mind, just for the record, if you can put give us your name and address again.
My name is Humberto Avila, and I own the property on 118 and 118 and a half North K Street. I'm worried because I'm going to be in between two commercial buildings, and I need to know what's going to happen to my property. Is it going to devaluate because it's just residential? Can I change it to commercial? I mean, I don't know nothing about, this
No.
business, and I just need answers.
No, understandable. You're concerned about the adjacent properties that you own, right? And
Yeah, because, I mean, it's, if it is, I understand if I can convert it into commercial, maybe it's going to be a little bit value for my property, but if it's going to still residential, then I feel like it's...
Sure.
Well, I don't know. I get this card, and I'm going to talk to him too, because I would like to know what are my options.
Of course, and just so you're clear here, the rezone will be to professional offices, which will be two separate buildings, which Mr. Boyle had just showed us on the illustration of what that would be. And I think it would be a safe assumption that the property values will certainly increase by having that on there versus what's there now.
Yeah, I don't object if it is just offices.
Yeah.
I don't think there is going to be like liquor store or...
No, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Is normal business hours is what I would imagine, nothing late in the evening, lights, things of that nature. But I think it would behoove you to have a conversation with Mr. Boyle, our planning director,
Yeah.
and he can certainly let you know what your options are, things like that. But before you leave, Councilman Oliver has a question. Or, I'm sorry, it's Councilman Rodriguez. My apologies.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, maybe the question, he brings up a pretty good point as far as value. Being that he is in the middle of these two commercial buildings, a duplex and this other proposed building, does that create an issue as far as his value, as far as an obsolescence for him because of his residential now being adjacent to two different commercial zone properties?
That's a good question, Councilman, and I'm not sure if my expertise would be in assessing a property's value. Currently, the property is a medium-density R2 zone property, and it provides for a duplex-type setup, as is evident on the site right now. In that there is higher density residential to the north. Certain staff would entertain a redevelopment of the site to a higher density residential consistent with the general plan. The O office designation does not provide for any retail types of activities on the property. It's specific administrative, professional, and medical offices with some very small leeway there. A beauty parlor, for instance, with a use permit would be allowable in the West Yosemite overlay. But in terms of the direct impact to the gentleman's property, I don't know whether I'd be the expert to answer that question.
And also, Chris, he had also a question in regards to him converting his property. Would that be a process that he'd have to go to get that rezoned as well? And being that it's an R2, would that fit into this, the proposed, is it a zoning change? I don't know if he's in that same area where that can be also converted to a similar property use.
Well, the West Yosemite overlay is only for properties that are in proximity to the West Yosemite corridor. There's a specific call out that you must be 175 feet from the West Yosemite corridor. In this case, that goes to the center line of the property that, the third property, there's actually 3 parcels there. So the 3 parcels that are proposed are consistent with that requirement. To go deeper down the block and to further impact the residential neighborhood that is on either side of the West Yosemite corridor, I don't know whether staff would be in support of an extension or a deepening of office uses into the neighborhood, but we certainly would be interested in a density change to provide the individual with a higher density type of project befitting of the property to his immediate north. Certainly seems to be an opportunity there, and our general plan encourages higher density development.
Thank you, Chris. I don't know if that answered the gentleman's question there, but I was triggered by his concern there as well.
I've provided Humberto my card, and I'd be happy to schedule time to meet with him.
It helped me understand a little bit more.
Sure.
And what I said, my concern is, I mean, this building with a lot of apartments right there, I think isn't that a commercial property? Built a apartment complex, is that a commercial building?
It's considered a multifamily residential property. I'm not specifically called out within our commercial zoning designations. So it's a high-density multifamily residential property.
Okay, just because because the way I feel is, if it is a complex, they're doing business, and I'm in the middle, and I'm not doing business. It's just my house. I'm renting it to my daughter right now, and and I really feel kind of bad feeling that I'm in the middle. So I'm going to be contacting you to get more information about this, if we can do something.
Very good. I look forward to it.
Great. Councilman Rodriguez.
Yeah, and one last question. So just to address that, the R2 does allow for a second unit in that lot, correct? I'm not sure if...
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct, Councilman.
Thank you. So I don't know if that addressed your question there as far as that other duplex. You also are zoned on R2 where...
I don't think it's a duplex because it's the old house with the guest house, the mother's house. And I think it's a little bit different. Is it different or is it a duplex?
Well, the rear property, the rear structure, could function as a second unit, I would think.
Yeah.
So the fact that there's 2 dwelling units on the property would make it a multifamily, consistent with the R2 density, 2 units per lot.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Please contact Mr. Boyle. Mr. Avila, I think he can answer a few more questions for you and any other concerns you may have. Thank you for coming down. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chris, there's an alley there just adjacent to the property. Is that going to be paved throughout that would go past Mr. Avila's property all the way to the next street? Is that a requirement?
I'll defer to the city engineer.
Thank you.
I believe they were taking access off the alley, and they did show it being paved.
All the way to, would it be 4th Street back there or 5th?
Yeah, the nearest street, I think, was
6th
6th Street, yeah.
6th, okay. Okay, so that would, which would once again improve the entire area. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll call for title.
Mayor, do you want to close the public hearing for the record, please?
Thank you so much for that. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, bring it back, and then call for title.
Thank you. Introduction of an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Madera amending the official City of Madera zoning map to rezone approximately 30,000 square feet of property located at 601 and 609 West Yosemite Avenue and 110 North K Street in proximity to the intersection of West Yosemite Avenue and North K Street from the R1 Low Density Residential Zone District to the WY West Yosemite Professional Office Zone District.
Mr. Mayor, I move to waive further reading and introduce item C1.
Second?
It's been moved to waive further reading and introduce item C1 as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thanks, Chris. Moving on to item C2, public hearing and consideration of a resolution adopting the City of Madera fiscal year 2017-18 budget. Tim.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and council members. This is our final budget presentation for fiscal year 2018. We've gone through a number of preliminary budget presentations. We had an exhaustive, hot budget workshop, worked through it, and now we're ready to present to council a document that we feel is worthy for council to consider for adoption. The budget highlights, and I'm just going to hit it as high of a level as I can this evening, but the total appropriations are $96.5 million. The general fund appropriations are $39.3 million. The enterprise funds appropriations are $37 million. The internal service funds appropriations amount to $5 million. And the special revenue funds in this proposed budget amount to $15.2 million. This is just a picture of what that looks like percentage-wise. You can see that the general fund now represents 42% of citywide appropriations. Enterprise funds are at 38%. 16% are special revenue funds, and 5% are the internal service funds. This is one of the pages that I updated, my staff and I updated today. When I was going through it the other day, I noticed that some of the schedules didn't tie out to other summaries and to the detail, so just wanted to be able to show this one page that council might pay special attention to. And those numbers have been corrected now, had very minimal impact on the budget overall, but we wanted to have the numbers correct for council to consider for approval. This is another page, the summary of expenditures by department, which is also a citywide schedule. And in this, these figures have been created. So as it reads, as can be seen in the summaries above, total citywide expenditures have increased by approximately $12.7 million from the 16-17 budget of $83.8 million to $96.5 million in fiscal year 17-18. The most significant increases are a $4.3 million increase in public works, a $3.5 million increase in public safety, related mostly to Measure K, and a $2.4 million increase in capital improvement projects, which increased from $8 million to $10.4 million in fiscal year 17-18. So the main reason for the increase is primarily the capital outlay. There was a large increase included in the public works budget. I believe it was $5.2 million for capital projects, which explains in large part the increase within public works budgets. So here's a picture of the general fund revenues versus expenditures. You'll see that in the 16-17 budget, we have the red bars represent expenditures and the blue bars represent revenues. So we had budgeted more expenditures than revenues, and we're estimating that we'll finish off the fiscal year 16-17 still with more revenue, with more expenditures than revenues, but by a much closer margin in total. In the past, we've tended to budget this way and then end up having a surplus by the end of the year. But each year, I feel that we've been tightening up the budget tighter and tighter, as we've discussed in the budget workshop. And this year, we're kind of taking a different approach rather than just saying, well, yeah, you've done it in the past. Let's assume that you're going to do away with that $1 million deficit. Staff is basically asking to work with council and with the departments to actually bridge that gap during the fiscal year, which you'll see during the presentation today. And you can see in the 17-18 projected, there's $39.3 million of expenditures versus $37.6 million of revenue. So changes since the budget workshop. Certain changes have been made to the general fund section of the budget since the budget workshop on June 19th. Expenditures were reduced by $544,000. revenues were reduced by $215,000 net, or in total. And so the deficit decreased by $329,000. We've implemented $400,000 per council's direction of the past year now that we're in the new fiscal year, the 16-17 Measure K revenue to be used for public safety purposes. And we've identified the need for further cost savings of $911,092. Here is a general fund summary. How, again, to kind of highlight how we've changed our approach this year. You'll see that right here is really the total deficit of $1.7 million for fiscal year 17-18. If you back out of that, the one-time expenses, which are capital outlay expenses related primarily to the new ERP system and other minor capital outlay costs for fiscal year 17-18, leaves you with the $1.3 million deficit. Against that deficit, Council has given us direction to utilize $400,000 of last year's Measure K revenues, which leaves us with the $911,000 deficit. Well, rather than just leaving the budget that way and saying we hope we're going to find a way to do it, we've added this line here for cost-saving measures to be identified and captured in fiscal year 17-18. In other words, we're proposing to have council approve, in effect, a balanced budget for the general fund, with the understanding that we'll need to find an additional $911,000 of savings during the year. Okay? I should point out here that fiscal year 16-17, we're showing a $102,000 deficit, but that's after you include the $800,000 of Measure K funds for which we had not budgeted expenditures in 16-17. So without that, it would have been a $902,000 deficit in fiscal year 16-17 overall for the general fund. If you back out the one-time expenses of $680,000, then you would be looking then at a estimated surplus of $577,000. But again, that includes the $800,000 of Measure K. Okay, so what cost-saving measures are to be taken? We've discussed implementing a soft hiring freeze, holding back on unnecessary travel costs, etc., finding ways to reduce operational costs, such as PG&E, communication lines, maybe copier contracts. Any way that we can find to cut back on operational costs will be helpful. We can search out opportunities to enhance revenues. We can identify city programs for potential cutbacks. And basically all of these cost-saving measures to be taken, they're yet to be identified. Staff is hoping that we can work together to identify those and come up with a plan to complete the fiscal year after the budget's been approved, of course. This is what the general fund expenditures by department looks like. Roughly 49.4% of the budget is now public safety, which public safety has definitely been enhanced by Measure K, and which now makes public safety a larger portion of the general fund budget, which leaves us with basically 51.6% of the budget for the rest of the departments within the city. Included in the budget and in council's staff report as part of the budget is the 5-year forecast. This picture has improved greatly since we last gave a 5-year forecast. We've cut back on the cost, and I'll just walk through this with council briefly, but you'll see that in the proposed 17-18 budget, we're looking at a structural deficit of $400,000, which is being filled by $400,000 of Measure K revenues for the year. I'm also showing the $911,000 of further cost savings, which brings us back to that $400,000 figure. That basically the $400,000 one-time transfer in or use of Measure K funds helps reduce that structural deficit. And then in the future years, I've included a 5% cost savings measure rather than the 911. I've just applied 5% of the total general fund expenditures budget, which, if we're able to obtain that 5% savings in fiscal year 2019, that'll leave us with a slight surplus, a slightly smaller surplus than in 2020, and then in 2021 we're seeing a slight deficit and a larger deficit in 22, and even larger deficit in 2023. These are related to, basically to the assumptions that were included in this forecast, and also included in the forecast are the impacts of the CalPERS increases, which we know are coming, and I've included those in the expenses for the future years. Roughly, we're looking at the 3% or roughly 3% increase in fiscal years 19 through 23 for sales tax, and 3% for property tax. In fiscal year 2019, you'll see that there's only a 1% total general fund revenues increase. That's due in part because of some transfers in that have happened over the past few years from certain funds, such as the Community Facilities District, that are not sustainable. I believe that we've budgeted as much as $800,000 from the CFD that allows that, and that's drawing down on the balance of those funds. So we can't continue, and so rather than projecting continued $500,000 to $800,000, reduce the future transfer in or revenues related to that to $250,000 because that's sustainable, and then I've incorporated the the percentage increase over the year to the various revenues as well, basically 2% to even those revenues. So, in short, we're looking at future deficits that, if we can find a way to bridge the gap in the current year and look forward to maintaining costs in such a manner that we can afford the CalPERS increase and whatever other increases may come along, then we'll be in a good fiscal situation. Any questions on the general fund budgets at this point?
Doesn't seem to be, Tim.
Okay.
Tim, I do have a question. I'm sorry. On the staff report, there is a section there in regards to the rental ordinance inspection and holding back on those 2 full-time jobs that would dip into the general fund. So my only concern is that, being that we pushed so hard for this to bring it to fruition, and if we lack staff, I mean, we expect this ordinance to be played out a certain way. We expect fees to be collected, obviously. But do we have, maybe down the way, if we come to find out that it is a requirement, not required, but we see that there's a lack of staff to go out and fulfill the ordinance the way it's supposed to be, can that be brought back here and possibly consider if we see that certain revenues are coming in? At this point, it's up in the air. Obviously, we don't know what's going to be collected and what not, but we do know that those 2 full-time employments will not happen. So my only concern is, are we going to meet the expectation of what we pushed so hard to do, which was the rental inspection ordinance? So maybe a question that maybe David might answer.
Thank you, Council Member. Through the chair, meeting expectations, the department meeting expectations is obviously something that the executive director should address. With regard to revisiting the budget and adding positions, council always has the opportunity to amend the budget.
And the only reason why I ask that is because I know that we're going to set out to start inspecting these rentals, but at any given point, if the work is to where we're not meeting the expectation, do we revisit that?
To the council member's point, at any point in time that we are not meeting your expectations, then we should revisit our service delivery plan. And if it needs amendment, then it's certainly within the council's purview to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions on the general fund budgets, I'll go briefly over the other types of funds. In the enterprise funds, they're projecting a combined deficit of $5.1 million, which reflects capital outlay of $10.5 million. And excluding the capital outlay, in other words, if you back out that $10.5 million of capital outlay, the enterprise funds are projected to perform well within their operational limits. In other words, their operations are funded sufficiently through current year projected revenues. And no material changes have been made to this section of the budget since the budget workshop. On the internal service funds, they have a projected deficit of $208,000 in fiscal year 17-18. The deficit is primarily due to scheduled replacement costs in fleet and IT, where we set aside funds each year to replace vehicles and to replace servers, computers, etc. And then when it comes time to replace those, we may be expending more dollars in that year than we're bringing in, but we hope to build up the revenues to have them there as needed. And no material changes have been made to this section of the budget since the budget workshop. In the special revenues funds, the projected surplus of $258,000 is projected for fiscal year 17-18, and no material changes have been made to this section of the budget since the June 19th budget workshop. As far as other budget changes, some revisions may be made to certain summaries or narratives within the budget prior to completion, or I should say prior to submitting the budget for awards to the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers. These revisions, however, will not impact the budget resolution figures. And in other words, if we're going to make any changes to any of the figures, we'll need to figures within the budget, any light items or anything within the budget itself, we'll need to do that as mid-year budget adjustments. And additional schedules or information may be added or updated. For example, we noticed some necessary corrections to be made in the fund balance summary. And I think that's primarily the one schedule that will be updated. But again, that's not going to impact any line items or the budget figures itself. So more information or images may be added to the budget document or revised over the next month or two before we submit it for the awards. And the final version of the budget, of course, will be made available and submitted to the CSMFO for awards. So we got this, and we got this, which is the 15-16 and the 16-17 excellence or operating budget excellence awards, and we hope to get the award again for our fiscal year 17-18 budget. Some of the changes I mentioned we'll be making are related to the checklist that comes from the CSMFO, the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers. The first section A is relatively simple, and you need to get so many points you need to get all the points within Section A, and then a majority of the points within Section B to be considered for the awards. And, for example, this one line, are there additional future years of forecasted revenue, expenditure, and organization detail schedules included? So you can get 1 point for every year beyond the year. We've included as many of those things as we could in the budget so far, and we'll continue to look for better ways to improve the budget. So we get comments from the judges on the budgets, and we've tried to incorporate all of the suggestions that they've given to us so that we can make a budget that's transparent, easy for the reader to understand, and that tells really the reader a lot about the city, not just about the dollars that get passed through the city. Actions to be taken by council tonight. This is a public hearing to consider a resolution adopting the City of Madera 17-18 budget and the 5-year capital improvement program. Typically, we would present the master fee schedule and master penalty schedule along with the budget this year, we weren't able to have those ready in time, so we will present those at a later time. And the 5-year CIP is attached to the budget, and it identifies nearly $121 million of future projects, which is over the next 5 years. Recommendation is for council to conduct a public hearing and consider adoption of the resolution. I'd be glad to answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that. I really appreciate it, and all the previous months that you've given us quite a few numbers. Any questions of Tim regarding the final budget presentation? Councilman Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tim, thank you for the presentation. I do appreciate all of staff's hard work and racking their heads over the preparation of this budget, which has been several months. So I do appreciate that. I wanted to pivot back to the master fee schedule. So what timeline are we looking at for this document? I know that we discussed this a bit during the last workshop or budget meeting. Can you elaborate as to that timeline?
Well, we hope to have it ready for presentation within the next 2 city council meetings at least.
And with that, are we going to be taking into consideration not only the 75% cost recovery, but as well as 100%? Will we be presented those options as well? Well, and I think moving forward, and obviously there's a significant amount of detail and thought that went into the preparation of this budget document. I do like looking over a 5-year period of time and evaluating, not only the services and demands, the services that are in demand today, as well as in the future of our citizens, as well as the services and that may not be in as much demand in the future, and also impending retirements and staff and department change. I think that we should be looking at many of those factors at a department level, working with people at the table and being as proactive as possible. And I think it could go into this effort, but I also think that there needs to be an economic development discussion to this as well, especially as we look at updating our master fee schedule, looking to see how we are being, competitive to bring more jobs to the community. We talk about that a lot. We've talked briefly about, ways that we can, have an edge on other communities, throughout the valley and in the state. But I would like to see perhaps through the discussion of updating the master fee schedule, figuring out ways that we could then augment an incentive program or whatever it might be to those businesses looking to locate here. So I don't want to go off tangent and get off the meat and potatoes of the budget discussion, but that was there was a bit of discussion at our last meeting with regard to that master fee schedule, and I think that we have to look at that both as to how are we going to have as much cost recovery as possible, especially since we're having to be as nimble and creative during these times as far as public finance. But also how we can be as competitive as possible. So I'd appreciate additional discussion in that regard moving forward. And again, I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this effort.
Mr. Mayor, if I may just speak briefly to Council Member Oliver's comments. My understanding of your discussion is that you would like to see perhaps a 75 and 100% recovery system so that you can have that discussion. I understand the interest, and I absolutely concur with you that we need to develop an incentive-based system. I see that primarily in terms of our impact fee program. I probably can't have an incentive program for you in a month, but with the understanding that I bring that back for your consideration, will that meet your expectation?
It will, and I think it will perhaps be, it'd be prudent, especially since this next year is going to be very hands-on as far as the council and our participation in the budget process. And I think maybe around mid-year or after the first of next year, we bring back another budget discussion or mid-year budget workshop to discuss where we're at and evaluate, where we are as far as sales tax dollars and whatnot. And maybe at that point we can have an elevated discussion as to potential incentives and ways to be competitive.
Understood, Council Member, and if I can get you there more quickly in terms of an incentive system, I will.
Right.
Thank you, David. Any other questions of Tim regarding the budget? Thank you, Tim, very much. At this time, I will open up the public hearing. This is a notice public hearing. If anyone in the audience wishes to speak to this item, please come forward. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the council for any further discussion or questions or concerns. I myself, first I want to again thank staff for all their hard work in getting us to this point. It honestly does seem in years past that we kind of get into that mode of plugging holes, if you will, and I really don't want to get good at plugging holes. I want to kind of piggyback on Councilman Oliver and what he had said regarding economic development, being a little more aggressive with making money in the city of Madera. And so cost recovery is not really the game changer per se. It's a good negotiating tool, but I certainly would recommend at least 75 to 100% cost recovery. Things like the casino would be money generating. We're moving forward with Loves, albeit slowly, but we are moving forward with the Loves Travel Center, which is certainly money generating. Freedom Industrial Park, we've had those public-private discussions to build another building and create jobs, which is what all of us certainly want to do. And then the discussion of cannabis. I think it would be prudent for us to at least have that discussion on how that can improve the economic outlook in the city of Madera, at least to find out what others are doing and how others have failed or others are succeeding. And again, not to reinvent the wheel, but I think that's something that we should at least be having those discussions to once again increase economic development. Master fee schedule, if we can get something in the next couple of meetings, that would be great. Thank you so much for that. But Tim, regarding programs, on programs it was really kind of vague. I know, David, you or with your staff are looking at programs. Do we need to be specific on any particular type of programs that we would be looking at? There's a number of programs out there that would be considered community service that obviously we know from the budget that are not money generating but are great for the community. But are we specific on those particular programs, or is that something that kind of from top to bottom we will look at collectively?
And Mr. Mayor, it's something we would look at top to bottom, but candidly, it would be useful to have some direction from the City Council. And if you'll bear with me a minute, let me make a couple specific points. We're a service-based organization. We don't build cars, we don't build chairs, we provide service. So the majority of our expense is in the people we employ. If we're going to talk about a service reduction plan, you can't get around the fact that we're going to reduce the size of the workforce. If that's the case, then once you go into the reduction mode of your workforce, there are specific legal requirements that have to do with the collective bargaining process. And as a city, we are nothing but about providing due process for the people who work here. It's about having a fair employment relationship. So typically, if you're going to go into a workforce reduction mode, we'd want to meet in closed session. We'd want to talk about, because the bargaining units are going to want to implement their right to fairly engage in collective bargaining with the city. Your personnel code already requires that you have to give people 30 days notice or 30 days of pay. You'd want to talk about the effects of a workforce reduction and how that relates to collective bargaining. And that has everything to do with measuring then what kind of savings you create. All of that to say that if you want us to pursue specific areas, like if you were willing to accept a reduction in the maintenance standard in your parks, I can bring you a specific recommendation on what that looks like and what the cost pieces are. If you were willing to accept longer wait times at the development counter, that's another kind of response. If you wanted to reduce some of the internal checks and balances we have at the city with regard to finance or safety, all of those have a cost element. If you give me that kind of direction, I can focus our time on that, and that then provides us a basis that we have an effective closed session discussion. And if we're going to pursue that route, make sure everybody gets their fair due process.
Of course.
What questions could I answer for the council in terms of that discussion?
Any questions regarding personnel or personnel reduction?
Is there any specific areas you'd like us to focus on because those are the decisions that the council makes?
Well, with that, David, and again, I'm trying to overturn every rock here to find out where we can either get cost recovery or cost savings. And since I see our director of RDA in the audience, this may be a good time to ask exactly where are we with RDA. I mean, I understand, Jim, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but we have assets at RDA, and I'm not sure what the timeline is for those assets, or when and how do we extinguish those assets? What is the forecast for RDA?
Basically, at our last meeting, you approved the housing budget, which is about 3 subdivisions. When those are done, that will probably have used up 80% of your remaining cash. And so there's no new cash unless we sell land. There's no new cash coming into redevelopment. It is effectively not necessarily living on borrowed time, but there's an end of the road, and that ends in sight.
Do we have land to sell?
Well, we've got a lot of land to sell.
Okay.
We will probably begin selling subdivision land in August. Our remaining properties would not be considered by most reasonable people to be high demand properties.
So if we had the discussion of consolidation of RDA, is that something that we'd be prepared to do? For instance, finance. If RDA has its own finance department, right? Is that something that
we utilize Tim?
We could utilize the city's finance department, Tim, your department. I think it's a discussion that we have to have. I'm looking at the horizon, and I'm looking at the future budgets that Tim had just proposed. And although we may have a couple of years that we could squeak by, but I'd rather have the discussion now rather than later as to where we go with RDA, where we go with our programs, where we go with personnel and employment. I'm just trying to turn over every rock on one side and fill some holes, but on the other side, my main focus is revenue generation.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim, very much. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at some more notes. I think that's a discussion, Mr. Tully, that we have to have. And I'm not sure if we at least have the discussion regarding personnel. You said that would be closed session. At the same time, I'd like to be a little more specific on what those programs would be, on where we would cut. There could be a number of little programs. I'm not sure if we're just going to cut out large programs, but I would like to either be in on those discussions or find out when staff's going to talk about those, and the same thing with consolidation of redevelopment and what's on the horizon for RDA.
I think I understand the direction, Mr. Mayor. I'm saying I think I understand the direction, and you can tell my mind's racing here. So the expectation from council would be that we begin to look for some areas where we could make some reduction. Depending on whether or not it impacts part-time or full-time employees, that has an impact on your discussion with regard to collective bargaining because your part-time employees are not part of represented units. So I think maybe as a starting point, we might schedule a closed session to talk about what we might do through the collective bargaining process. You could define the four corners of the box for me in terms of what I have to negotiate with. And in kind of parallel fashion, we can begin to look at alternatives within the organization and bring those back for your consideration. Am I coming somewhere close to the mark?
Yes, you are. That's what I'm looking for, is to start those discussions, not necessarily be definitive, but to define those four corners of the box. Councilman Oliver.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. This, we've obviously agreed to be as hands-on as possible. For me, I think it would help to kind of, obviously we have a great grasp of many of the programs and services that we deliver at the city. We have, a terrific talent pool of people that carry those out. Would it be possible if we even, I'm just throwing it out there, between us as a council, if we were able to designate a representative or person to, let's say, one particular department to really, kind of get in the ins and outs and whatnot, and would that kind of spark a brown, I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just envisioning a little bit more engagement or hands-on kind of at the table, at the department and staff level with council's involvement. And, instead of just Mr. Tooley and his team, packaging maybe a set of, recommendations or things to look at, maybe if there's at least time or window of opportunity for council, if they'd like it, to be as hands-on as possible.
We had done that exercise in the past, if I'm not mistaken, a few years ago. A council member was designated to a particular department to do exactly that.
The mayor is correct. There is no legal prohibition against doing so. We had some uneven results from the last exercise, but it is not without merit.
And perhaps it's not, again, we don't want to go from just plugging holes. Perhaps it's more of, if we're taking a look at a particular department or service and looking at that over a multi-year period. What does that look like in 2020 or 2025? Maybe kind of some of those discussions. And also to provide additional frame of reference. What I like about reading through some of the budget proposals is we look at previous years and what we budgeted for and what the actuals came in at, and that provides some frame of reference. But I think there needs to be a greater, maybe hands-on discussion as to what does the frame of the city service delivery look like.
Right. We have to forecast. If our forecast over the next 4 years, good, these are projections, we have to be just as pragmatic when we're discussing budgets in this year.
Really, the narrative of your budget is defined for the next 5 years and probably 8 years.
Exactly.
Your PERS cost.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what else. Well, that's not a correct statement. Unless our bargaining units are willing to pay an increasingly larger share of their PERS cost, then we're going to have to create an additional revenue stream or cut other services. And as I said in my budget message, our goal line needs to be one of the last cities standing when the courts give us relief and the legislature finally pulls their head out of the sand. Because until then, it's going to be increasingly difficult to deliver services at the municipal level.
And we don't know when that is, if at all. So we have to make those assumptions in our projections and forecast the next 3 to 5 years.
So spinning off of Councilmember Oliver's interest, I don't think police and fire would necessarily be in play.
Right.
Your two next big cost centers that are pure general fund money are going to be code enforcement and parks. Almost everything else in the city after that in the general fund is cost allocated. So by that I mean that if we were looking at Councilmember Oliver's activity and he was 50% general fund and 50% water fund, well, that has an impact on how we define the service delivery plan.
Sure.
I'm thinking about how we craft this, because last time we both police and fire were in play. They're not this time. What would the council's preference be? Would you like to visit with a limited number of departments? Would you like to visit with all those other than public safety? And how would we go about that?
I would like to assign Mr. Tooley, if I could. And I think we have a number of departments like planning and engineering, even wastewater, that I think would need the same attention. And so if my colleagues don't mind, I think I will have discussions with them on to which department they would like to visit.
Pleasure of the council, Mr. Mayor.
Now, you said that fire and police would be exempt.
Through the chair, council member, the city just passed Measure K.
Yes.
And the commitment that we collectively made was that we were going to use that for public safety.
Correct.
So we could certainly look at how we use that money most effectively, but I wouldn't look to reduce dollars in public safety, because that would just be a bait and switch.
Yeah, and I don't think that would be a good play. I'm just saying, I mean, as far as reduction, not necessarily on the services, but is there anything in those departments that could potentially, without having to reduce personnel? And or services, you know, I mean, at this point, I think you're bringing a lot to the table. Just want to make sure that we don't miss anything that we can save on. And I know that those departments now, as it is, you know, are in the need of every single penny that they need, you know, but.
Not to put words in your mouth, council member, but I think what you're asking for is you want to make sure that the dollars were being used as most efficiently
Correct.
as possible.
Yes, and I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just saying that we assure that we are doing that.
As an organization, we understand the process that we need to ask and answer the correct questions to be effective. So there's no hesitation in terms of going through that exercise.
And if that's the wish of the council to have those exempt from this exercise, then I'm okay with that. I just made the comment that, or asked the question as to why that would be out of the exercise.
That's a good question. I understand completely. But again, with the passing of Measure K, that we totally and 100% unanimously agree that that would be public safety money, then there certainly is no question there about any other reductions in public safety.
I'm not comfortable having that.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I may help you craft this a minute, I sense there's a consensus on the council. This is something you'd like to pursue. If that's the case, then I think certainly you could make assignments to departments, coordinate through my office so that we can do that most effectively. On behalf of the city attorney, I would admonish you not to talk to one another about your various efforts until we come back into an open session so that you can have that discussion as a group. You want to avoid the serial meeting exercise.
I think it's a great suggestion, Councilman Oliver. It was a wonderful exercise when we did it. It gave you a chance to sit in with the directors and their employees and kind of get a better sense of their day-to-day operations, and they have the chance to bend the ear of the council and vice versa. So I think it's a great exercise and will certainly show some positive. Any other questions or concerns regarding the budget?
Now, if I may, Mayor Medellin, I'm sorry, and I take it you have participated in this exercise before. Might I ask how this plays out as far as individual council members visiting departments and their staff?
Well, I had the pleasure of meeting with the Parks Department. And so Marianne brought in a team of various employees from all aspects of Parks Department. And I got to hear directly from them on what they do, how they do it. We discussed not only budget, but day-to-day activity. And Marianne gave each employee an opportunity to speak as to their job and what it means to the city of Madera. So it was a great exercise in learning from our employees who work very, very hard in the city of Madera. It's something that you cannot get from a report or from a book. And I think, as Councilman Oliver said, it's the great step in being hands-on in approving a budget, adopting a budget, and understanding that particular aspect of that particular department.
So just want to understand this correctly. So if in a case where maybe I visited the planning department, then I would go in there and visit
Mm-hmm.
planning department, his staff. I would assume that they would really showcase their department, obviously, because nobody wants any cuts in their departments, correct? So, I mean, I find it very difficult because I think that all departments in the city of Madera do an excellent job. You know, and I think every single little resource that they have is what they need to provide the services. But I understand that this is tough times, and those decisions, I'm not sure if they should come from individual members to decide and make a consensus, or is that something that we should allow our city manager?
Well, if I may, a couple of examples. One with planning department, we have a formula in place for cost recovery, and that formula may entail something like an average amount of time per customer that we can see on paper. And so if we're doing a particular permit or something, there's an average amount of time. But until you stand behind that counter and you actually interact with the customer or see staff do their day-to-day operations, you don't get that full sense unless you actually see that what we planned on a 30-minute conversation to do a permit for a shed in the backyard turns into a 2-hour conversation, or vice versa. Same thing in the planning department, or excuse me, in the parks department. There's a number of programs that, quite honestly, on paper, they don't look very good. They're in the red. But when you see the fireworks display last night, and you see the thousands of people that packed the place, and thank you for what you have done, and thank the staff for what they have done, and the staff in their overtime with their smiling faces, even though they're tired and they're hot. Unless you get that particular sense and get a little dirt on your nails, so to speak, you don't necessarily get that true sense of exactly what they do. And quite honestly, with what we're doing at the Citizens Academy in PD and what we're doing at the Citizens Academy here at the City of Madera, it's kind of the same thing. It just gives you a glimpse of what we do in our day-to-day operations. And so I see it along those very same lines that although it's only a couple of hours or half a day, it does give you, in my opinion, a better appreciation for just what we do. And I think it makes our decision-making up here a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Of course.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. I think the intent for what I propose is really to start by seeing before doing. If we're going to anticipate on coming back, several months from now, looking at proposed cuts, which may translate to personnel cuts, then I want to be able to see and be able to know and be able to hear from everyone. But most importantly, I hope that that isn't the case. I think that we go through, I think that we exercise prudent, conservative financial planning, as have been what's shown in the past. I think that we do prepare for the worst and we hope for the best. And in previous budget cycles, we've proven that. I think there are times where we have become a bit surprised as to perhaps sales tax or property tax activity, times when we have been disappointed. So my hope and anticipation is that those numbers are going to grow beyond the 3% in sales tax and property tax because of new development that may be in the queue or underway. But I think for me, it's an opportunity to just know these individuals and the departments, be a bit more hands-on, and whether it be to provide additional frame of reference down the line as far as looking at budget or looking towards the future in our service delivery, making sure that we are providing our constituents the best value for that service and making sure that it's compatible with the needs that are in demand today or in the future. So I don't know that it's an exercise to say we're going to go through a competition and we're going to meet with all the different departments and staff and see who can give their best show. I don't think that would be the intent or purpose. I think it would be one to learn, to know, to see, to feel, and I think that we will all be better informed and more educated into the intricacies of those departments, and I think that it could be prudent. So that was the intent of my proposal. Obviously, I hope that 6 months from now, the budget looks a bit more promising, which it may swing. But in any event, I think we'd be preparing for the future. So that was kind of the intent of that proposal. But
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Of course.
I think I need some clarification now. The exercise we went through a couple of years ago was we had a council member go to a department. And I'm not sure if I'm following the conversation correctly. It almost sounds like you guys might be interested in visiting each of the departments on an individual basis. Am I mishearing? It's not a bad idea.
I don't know that you should be precluded.
Well, I'll be very honest. I was assuming it was the previous exercise where one council member went to a department. But now that you say that, I'm certainly amenable to that. If that's something that we can swing, I think that would be a fantastic idea.
It's an allocation of your time, and we have to be very careful not to be in a decision-making mode. What you're doing is that you're getting hands-on, you're getting to see the department, and you're gaining information that helps you make decisions. As an organization, we choose to believe the more you know, the better decision you'll make.
Well, Mr. Tooley, this really wouldn't be that much different from doing a ride-along or taking a tour of the wastewater treatment plant, would it not?
Exactly. But we could do it systematically so that every council member got to go through the entire city. There's no agenda. You're not going to bring back a recommendation that we're going to stop making widgets. We're going to provide you additional information so that you make good decisions.
Yeah, and just go back to the comments that both Mayor Medellin and Councilman Oliver, I think that's a good approach to be able to see, and that's why I asked in the past how this works out and how it plays out, because, it's important to know the people that work in these departments, but also taking in mind that, you are working with people and you're looking at people, and nevertheless, every person there is very important asset to the city of Madera. So it's very difficult for someone like me to step into a department and sit there and wonder whether, hey, is this a program that we can do without? So I think after you touched on it, Councilman Oliver, I think you bring up a good point. It gives me an opportunity to really get to see the department and get to know the employees and really spend some time to be able to see exactly what goes on in our day-to-day business. I will say that that being said, I like good coffee and pastries in the morning.
Just setting it out there.
Mr. Mayor, I would see this, and again, this is you, so you tell me, but I see for a lot of departments this might be a 2-hour commitment. Really nothing too substantial, although I'm sensitive to your time. On the other hand, you get a very large department like Public Works or Parks and Recreation, you might need half a day.
Sure.
So if this is something you'd like to pursue, I'd like for your city team to put our heads together a little bit, kind of define what that looks like for you, and then we'll obviously coordinate with you on what the scheduling looks like. I think we could get everybody through it in some kind of reasonable time period, if that's agreeable to the council.
Well, if we are going to do each department, then we could have council members in pairs, or quite possibly no more than 3 at any one time, versus 7 different visits. Is that possible?
You can do it. It really does. I don't know that it matters whether you do it individually or in groups of less than a quorum. The only kicker I would have is that you do not engage staff in what Council Member A said, if you're Council Member B, and that way you don't create sort of a spoken wheel serial meeting. So you just have to be real careful to partition it. You're kind of flirting a little bit with it, but I think if everybody and staff can be directed to not to engage you in that manner, and I think we'd be okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was assuming that Brent would be accompanying us for each visit to make sure that we stay in line. So.
Yeah, I've got plenty of time to do that, and I'll just,
Well, I just want to be cognizant of staff's time. I think 3 visits would be better than 7 visits.
Again, it's primarily a scheduling issue. If we can get 2 or 3 of you to visit at the same time, that's going to work better for everybody, and you're going to spin off one another.
Sure. Mayor Pro Tem Gallegos, sorry.
That's okay. Mayor Medilla, and that was what I was going to say, if we could be in pairs, because staff's time, if we're looking at a 2-hour presentation, I mean, that's a lot of time away from what we are asking them to do for us. So I was thinking the pairs would be good if Brent was good with that.
We're good?
You heard Mr. Anderson earlier.
That's right. So we're the greatest. Any other discussion or direction regarding the budget? Seeing none, I will ask for a recommendation.
I'm just looking back at the item, Mr. Mayor, make sure there's no waiving or, well, after further discussion, Mr. Mayor, I'd make a motion to approve item C2 as presented.
There's a public hearing, though.
Didn't we do the public hearing already?
Yeah, I closed the public hearing, did I not? Yes.
I'll second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve the budget for the 2017-2018 fiscal year with the updates to the 5-year capital improvement program. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And once again, thank you, everybody, for all your time with this budget matter. Moving on to item E1, biweekly water conservation report for June 12th through June 25th. Mr. Randall.
So, in front of you is just sort of a quick recap of the biweekly report. The numbers show we're down a little bit in conservation. We're at 21. Last reporting period, we were at 24. You can see from the pie chart, a majority of the staff's time is being spent in water meter issues. There's still a lot of water patrol going on in conservation still. So that's the normal stuff. The bigger item tonight, and why we're actually on the agenda rather than on consent, to just sort of address some of the issues that the public have with water conservation. Everybody knows that the state declared that the emergency is over. We are no longer under a state mandate to make conservation goals, 28%, et cetera. We still have state mandates for certain conservation restrictions, and we have to report. We can't do things like put turf in medians and things like that they sort of outlawed. But that's pretty minor. For the most part, they're off our back, and they're not rattling their sword too loudly at us. But while we most certainly have seen a wonderful wet year, and now we've got flooding and everything else, that drought that everyone's seen is over with is not the same drought we deal with in doing water production. That's a drought that's underground, the groundwater. And that's the difference. That's why currently we're still at a level B in our current ordinance, which is a 2-day-a-week watering issue. But it's pretty natural for everybody else to see all this flooding and the rivers and say, well, why can't I water? And they see other cities going to more lenient watering schedules, and they say, well, me too. The situation is just simply different between city to city. If you're in Clovis or Fresno and you use surface water, which you now have a lot of, and you have water recharge, well, then you have a different situation. And it's not just whether you have surface water or not, there's also just your own infrastructure and how much redundancy you have. So the question, why not 3 days a week, right? The main issue for us to be concerned with in Public Works is a service delivery issue about the peak demand between 6 and 11, when everyone's got their lawn sprinkler on and everyone's taking a shower and doing their laundry and all those things. That's your time when we have every well going that we have, and we have to make sure that we have not only the capacity to give everybody water, but we also have enough in reserve so that we can fight a fire if necessary. The ability to maintain that is what sort of drives this issue.
The goal per our infrastructure master plan tells us everything we want to know about our water system. It says we should have enough capacity in our well system to be able to meet that peak demand, plus have 2,000 GPM over that for fire flow, right? That's the ideal. And in the past, historically, we've met that or exceeded it. Then comes the drought, and we start taking away the capacity of all our wells to pull the same amount of water out. So a well that used to be able to generate 1,800 GPM per minute is now giving me 1,000 or maybe only 800 gallons per minute. So I went from a V8 to a 4-cylinder, and we just don't have the same horsepower to provide that same capacity. So where we're currently at is that we can maintain the pressure, and we have enough capacity in our elevated tank, the 1 million gallon tank we have out there, to sort of give us backup. But we are drawing down on that, which puts us in a precarious situation that if we were to lose additional resources, i.e. we go through another drought, we lose a couple more wells, then we won't have that resources. We'll draw that down to a point where if there's a fire, it'll take more water than we have on hand, and our wells can't keep up. So water systems are quite frequently about having redundancy. We may remember a couple of years ago, Parkwood had a problem. Because we had enough redundancy, we could help them out, and they've got a pretty small demand. But we're starting to lose some of that capacity. So you would think, okay, we have this big demand. Well, let's spread it out. You know, everybody wants to take their payments and spread it out over 5 years, not pay it all in one, right? Well, it doesn't actually work the way you would think. You would think that if you allowed people to water more days, they would just not water as much each day. But what we find is people don't sort of behave that way. When you open those floodgates and tell people you can water, they water. Matter of fact, they water in and do a little more. It's just human nature. Back in 2014, we were on 3 days a week. Our peak demand then was 1,000 GPM more than we have now. So, you know, we never really know what the human consciousness is going to do. The sociology of this and people's consciousness about water conservation and stuff changes. We're seeing our water conservation numbers fall, and I think we sort of understand that. 2 years ago, everybody understood the drought. Everybody was really engaged. They're not so happy anymore about that. So it's very likely that if we go to a 3-day-a-week, we're going to open the floodgates, we're going to get a lot more demand. I don't know. That's just what we've seen. Could something else happen? Sure. But in terms of staff's perspective, that risk is what we worry about. However, the good news is that's not a permanent issue. Assuming that we don't have another dry winter, that our groundwater doesn't get worse, what we have in the works right now and what we're doing should start to see is an increase in our pumping capacity. And that's even without the groundwater recovery. Now, water recovery, like a lot of people don't understand, doesn't happen the same year that you get the water. It's several years before we start getting that water into the groundwater where we pump from. You may have a very shallow well someplace that's pumping at 50 feet. Yeah, they're going to get some water, but not when you're down at 200 plus feet and you're drawing the volumes that we're drawing. So, but in the meantime, we have a number of wells that have different repairs being done to them. We're taking one well that we thought was out for the count. We're bringing it back. But we should have, if things don't change, the ability to sort of deal with that and be able to do 3 days a week or more in 3 to 6 months. But unfortunately, that's after our summer period. And we don't have an issue in the fall or winter or spring. We just don't have that much demand. There's also some long-term fixes. We don't always want to have to be on the edge of water bankruptcy, right? So the long-term plan is to provide above-ground storage. Your capital program has that in it currently. Your 5-year CIP, which you just adopted, goes out even further, and we have more projects in there. But the idea is to put above-ground storage as part, again, of your water master plan. And in there, it calls for one or more, probably multiple above-ground tanks, so that if I've got 3.5 or 7 million gallons above-ground storage, I don't have to worry about that drawdown. What happens is, rather than when we have growth, we don't just keep adding wells. We simply use those above-ground storage to pump into, particularly when there's non-demand and when electricity is cheaper, and allow us to do servicing more frequently and other things. So there isn't, it's not that this issue isn't unforeseen, it's something we're seeing, but building those tanks is not quick. It's 3+ years to make that happen, and it is already on the table now, so we're not waiting. So in the end, staff's recommendation is, for right now, that we sort of retain the current level, and we can come back in 9 months and look at what our winter weather does and where we're at, and we ought to be able to reassess whether it makes sense to do something more. If you'd like, one thing we could do is, a lot of the people's concern is they're going to say, well, I'm losing my tree, I'm losing my bush. We've heard that all through the drought. We could go to unlimited drip, allow that, and that really doesn't affect our peak demand, because you can do that on a long term. It's a slow flow issue. It doesn't hurt us. But we could make that provision. It would take an amendment. Staff could bring that back to you. Or, the last, which we aren't necessarily recommending, is you could direct us to draft an amendment to allow you a 3-day-a-week watering schedule and hope for the best. With that, though, we would stay with our first recommendation. I'd be glad to answer any questions that I could for you.
Thanks, Dave. Councilman Rodriguez.
Dave, you brought up, you said demand, and when we talk about demand, and you mentioned some peak hours there, is that when typically most households use their most water, between 5 and 6? And you mentioned something about sprinklers going on about that time. Is that pretty much?
Correct. That's when we see the demand. We can't tell you exactly what everyone's using, but we see that, yeah, if you look at our charts at our pressures and our volume in our elevated tank, you'll see this dip, and then we recover.
And that happens about that time there, right?
Yes.
Okay. But we don't know if it's due to either their house or their sprinklers or what have you.
No, we can't definitively. I guess we could do some analysis. With the newer software we have, it's sort of interesting. We can sort of tell when someone's running a sprinkler because the pattern of use is sort of a constant.
Okay.
We can tell when people have leaks. It's just a very slow constant. But I don't know that would change anything, and I think the analysis may be questionable, whether it has real value.
The reason why I ask is because, obviously if you can spread that out, then it wouldn't really create such a big demand. But, that would be something maybe in the future that we might be able to utilize, especially with the way water demand goes. And my other question, I do like that thing about the unlimited drip. And the only reason why is because, I've had some calls out, and I've seen some trees that, quite frankly, they look pretty bad, in bad shape. And I don't know what that does, again, to obviously the neighborhoods and communities where these trees are, they don't look too good. And,
big investment to lose,
obviously, when you're driving around and you're looking about investing in your community, then, water is always an issue.
Yeah,
and we're going to be compared to other communities, and of course, people don't know that we might not have a surface water treatment plant or where they're able to draw more water. But I did have that concern. Obviously, you answered a lot of the questions. In the past, historically, has Madera ever been like on a 5-day watering? Was that something that they did before?
Yes, we've had unlimited watering a majority of the time.
So slowly, I think we're cutting down to where essentially, 2 days. Could you foresee in the future that potentially might even go to 1 day? And will that council accept that? So once you take it, can you give it back? And I think that's where we're at now. We've down to 2 days. Giving that third day seems like it's impossible right now, obviously, based on your presentation. With some of the capital improvements, then that might be something that maybe in the future we can. 9 months from now. But is that likely to happen based on the way we're moving?
The ability to allow additional watering days? I think it's very highly to happen, unless we see something that we don't expect. We go through another drought, and the farmers start pumping the heck out of the aquifer, and my production falls from 800 GPM to 6, or I can't get anything out of a well. So, I can't tell you what the weather is going to do or what the ag community is going to do. I know they affect us dramatically. But short of that, we know what we're doing with our system, and we know where we'll be at in terms of capacity. And short of a new next phase of drought, heaven forbid, we should be back to a place where, we can go to 3 days or more watering.
Well, you brought up a good point, especially with your staff report talking about drought. It's not the drought that people think about. You're talking about a drought underground, which is an aquifer drought. And that we can see statewide, but nevertheless, I'm still concerned, are we able to go back to a 3-day? I mean, I know that people would like to see that. I like the unlimited drip deal because that would at least give those trees an opportunity to flourish and look good within those communities. Obviously, the lawns, I can't speak for those, but even my own, it's not.
There's different ways to look at that. I mean, if I'm looking at it just from an operational capacity issue, it's a peak demand issue. If you look at it in a more holistic, large water basin issue, well, then it's more of a conservation issue where we need to be trading out lawns for other types of landscaping that doesn't require that. And so we don't want to give up on conservation completely and just say everyone needs a fountain in their front yard. But we do want to give people the freedoms to enjoy the things that, they ask of us. We do want to deliver the service.
Yeah, and last but not least, I know that we have these capital improvement projects, but, I've always, played with the idea that someday, maybe in the future, we too can have some type of surface water treatment. I know that that's something that costs a lot of money. But nevertheless, I think that would be the prudent way to go about it because you talked about these water pumps and how you're just patching sometimes just to get them going. And essentially, when the water drops, and I mean, what's your plan then?
Yeah.
So
we try to keep every avenue open. Surface water is one of the more difficult ones because of the legal challenges and the water rights issues. There's just too many players for the limited capacity. You see the stuff all the time. You see the posters, no train, give me a dam. Pick your slogan, you'll find something. But it's probably been 4 or 5 years ago, we actually hired a water rights attorney to help us look at what we might be able to leverage. What could we do? And after a fairly short time, what we found was we aren't in a position that we really are a player that's going to get any water immediately without a large amount of legal entanglement and expense. And it's a long process. We might get some water if there's a new entitlement, there's a new dam, let's say, and we could get our foot in the door somehow. We don't know. But those things are something we always have to keep our options open and be looking for. We have money in the budget to constantly look for those. But the probability of our ability to get into that this late in the game when everybody else already got their piece of the pie and they don't want to give it up is very small. We're looking to optimize where we can through relationships with MID and things like that. But there really isn't any low-hanging fruit that we can just pluck and go at. It's going to take some hard work and looking for that opportunity that may come along. But we most certainly are always about trying to look for that opportunity. And you've got a lot of good staff, city engineers, and Mr. Merchant's very involved with the Sigma and all the other things going on with water. And so we're aware of what's going on, and we'll be looking for opportunities. The other thing is it's very expensive. The type of plant we're talking about, easily you could spend $50 million, and your cost of water is going to be a lot more expensive than what your well water is. But when you look at this at, let's say, a 50 or 100-year perspective, you're absolutely right. What legacy are we leaving for our children? Hopefully, the state's new emphasis on taking a look at the basins and controlling use so it's more stable might help us. We've been in a falling groundwater level for years. I don't know how far back it goes, but years. We have land subsidence issues and other things you're all aware of. But if we get to a point where that starts to stabilize, well, then we might be in a place where we're not so worried. But then there's climate change and everything else. Who knows? But for the immediate foreseeable future that we can sort of control and act on, this is sort of what we're doing. We're trying to find a system that gives us enough capacity and enough elasticity so we're not every year trying to guess out whether or not it's feast or famine.
And you know, I guess to end my comment here is that, you know, you brought up another interesting point is that those relationships, especially like with MID, that we seek for those not necessarily when it's a time of chaos, but a time of opportunity when things aren't as high as demand. I think water is a big demand now, but maybe if the opportunity ever presents itself where we're not in a drought, so to speak, then we might be able to establish those relationships. So in the future, like you said, I mean, you want to leave a legacy, you're talking about 50 years, that's just down the road. Yeah. You know, you know, what are we doing today that can help future of Madera? So thank you for your time, David.
Okay. Thank you, Councilman Rodriguez. Councilman Oliver.
Well, I know approved in this last budget is to do some retrofits as far as the stormwater basins to allow for the recharge capability. What's an update there as far as those projects?
Well, this year we had a little bit of a delay because we've had so much water in the basins we can't get in to do as much work as we'd like to. So we shifted things a little bit. There was an item that came to a few months back to sort of address that. We currently just put in 8 dry wells in Foxglove. Those were completed last week. We also completed 2 lines for Kennedy and San Sebastian storm drain basins. These are lines our staff put in themselves. Pretty proud they did good work. What they allow us to do is to regulate the water so that we can pump it out if we have to, so that we don't have to worry about trying to get rid of water when we just get them full because we're worried about the next storm. But the fact that we've sort of connected pipes so we can get rid of it without causing flooding, well, then we can leave it higher and we can get more percolation. So that was part of it. And then we are phased for this next year, unless the basins are full again, which may be a good thing and a bad thing, to try to get more dry wells in to complete the rest of the basins. We also have a project with MID to put in a pipe. We're working on, our engineer's been working on it really, keep it all of hard work. And I know we're still not quite there, but it will connect their canal to the Berry Basin so that we can recharge that. Those are those relationships that we're trying to maintain. We also got a conference call tomorrow to talk to some agronomists about trying to understand the benefit analysis of this. If I can get 100 acre-feet of water and I get it for free, well, I'm going to take it, I'm going to recharge, there's no question. But if I have to pay $100 an acre-foot for that water, how much is it affecting me? On the macro, any water we can get in the ground helps. But we're not in a defined basin. Sure. Our water just doesn't stay here. All the water that I put in at the wastewater treatment plant, that 5 million gallons per day that gets percolated out there, doesn't really help me up because we're all up gradient pumping from here. So we're trying to understand a little bit how that works so we can make decisions about what are good investments or where we need to make improvements or what we can do to sort of optimize that. I mean, we always want to be good players, but we don't want to spend a lot of money on water that just ends up helping a farmer. Not that the farmer doesn't need the help, but we're supposed to be benefiting our rate users, not the farmer.
Definitely. No, absolutely. And I think as Councilman Rodriguez alluded to and what Councilmember Rigby had mentioned, I think during the last time we discussed this, it may have been during council reports, I think kind of that joint discussion with Madera Irrigation District as to ways we can leverage that infrastructure, even if it's through recharge and linking to their canal system, which, you know, that kind of serve as arteries, you know, to the city. I think that would be well worth looking at. with respect to 3 to 6 months and allowing for certain improvements and maintenance that's going to allow for that increased capacity, as you mentioned, what I kind of read was in 3 to 6 months, we may be in a position with that capacity, having that work been done, to go back to the 3 days a week.
Correct.
Now, if we were to go to 3 days a week now, can we still perform that necessary work to get us that capacity?
Well, we have to do the work there. I mean,
No matter what.
the well 20 is out of the ground.
But does...
So we'll do that work. Whether the only question I don't know is when we get well 20 back in, we're assuming we're going to get maybe another 800 GPM out of it. Well, until you actually put it in and run it, you don't know. Well 27, which used to produce around 1,800 GPM, we had to take offline probably, I don't know, I think it was before I was Public Works Director, I think it was 8 years ago or more, because of an issue with, there was a water issue with the GACs and such. Well, we found a way to sort of solve the problem, but we had to finish those improvements. We thought it would be a lot faster, but the regulatory process and getting a line under the SP railroad to discharge our flush and stuff, those things are just really laborious and difficult. So right now, if we're on schedule, yeah, we'll have both those improvements, and then we'll have a lot more capacity. Again, there are variables. If suddenly the farmers start pumping the heck out of the aquifer and I lose more wells, well then there goes my, in one hand and out the other. So
yeah, I think the last piece of information I'd be interested in. I appreciate the water updates that we received to see where we're at as far as conservation. Maderans have long been stewards of our precious water supply. Even going back and looking at our use per capita compared to most communities, it's far less. I'd be interested in what that conservation amount is compared to 2013 baseline levels that the governor's office used in 2015. Does that make sense? So I know right now we're about 22, 23% compared to 2015, but I'd be interested.
No, those are based on 2013 numbers.
Okay, but in the report it lists 2015.
I may have written it wrong. I'm sorry.
Okay.
When you look at our conservation numbers, we started tracking the numbers in 2015,
okay,
but the conservation is compared against 2013. That is
okay,
what the state mandated us compared to.
It's just the cumulative since 2015.
Yeah, that's when we started our
23%.
water conservation. We
Yeah.
started measuring, and
okay.
so we've got 2 years basically of data, and you see the trend. It's not going the way we want. It's going the other way.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Dave, I've had a lot of community members come and email, text, see me in person that are concerned that our city is not looking its best. And so if people are looking to move here and they drive around, it doesn't look as good. That is another concern, that people that do live here are looking to move out of here, because I hear a lot of comments where I look out my window and we look like Parkwood. And it is true, if you drive around, there is a lot of places in our city that do look like it's dry in Parkwood. So what I look at is we paid thousands of dollars to put meters in for our residents. And so if we went to 3 days a week to watering, their water bill will go up, correct?
It went up anyway.
So if it goes up, they're not going to maybe water that third day.
Well, potentially it'll go up if they use more water.
Right, they will use more water. So if it's a third day water and they realize after a bill, oh my gosh, I can't water 3 days because I can't afford it, then really we don't have the whole city watering 3 days, but we're giving them that option.
That's going to be a part of the equation, most certainly price sensitivity. Because our rates have to be developed per the 218 process, they're not structured on market. Our rates aren't, while they're stepped, they're not stepped that significantly, and our base rates are relatively low, and compared to other cities, we're a steal. I mean, I live just outside the city, and I'm paying $85 a month, so not a good deal. We just haven't found that there's that much concern. There is a percentage of the population that's on fixed income. They don't have any money, and you're right. That'll motivate them, but that is such a small percentage, I don't think we're going to see much of an impact. Now, We haven't done any empirical study of that. That's an intuitive analysis, but I would say even if we did that, we're going to find that the revenue is not going to change. One of the things with water is because we have so much fixed costs, when we see a reduction in use consumption, we don't see a corresponding reduction in expenses. Yes, your PG&E bill is going to go down a little bit. We're not going to pump as much. But you still have the same staff. You still have to do the same regulatory processes. You still have to maintain that same meter, whether 100 cubic feet go through it or 50,000 cubic feet go through it. It's just the same fixed cost. So whether it's an element, and unfortunately it affects the people that are least able to bear the burden, I don't think it's going to make that big of a change. Other cities, tried prior to some of the things, like some of the stuff they did with Clovis, a lot of people just pay the difference. I don't care if it's an extra $50. I'm going to have a green lawn. So.
Okay, and if you bear with me, Mayor Medulin and council members, on the CIP, it said that you were putting in a $300,000 meter shop.
Not this year, but in the future.
Next year, and that is for what reason? Are our meters not maintained by the company that put them in?
No, when they put them in, they're ours. And
Okay.
basically, you have two different types of meters. You have, 13,000 residential 1-inch meters, and those, for the most part, you don't maintain them in the way that you would a large meter. A small meter is simply, for the most part, you replace it, other than some simple repairs you can do. Let's say the contacts to it are going out or something. They're small repairs, but for the most part, you don't try to do it. We've had people constantly say, no, it doesn't read right, so we'll go out and we'll do a physical test to verify, yeah, it works. But large meters, where you have a lot of revenue coming through, have to be checked. Otherwise, you lose money. You do the same thing with the small meters, but there you just do it by replacing them. So the meter shop will be to deal with the larger revenues. Right now, I believe we have $50,000 in this year's budget to deal with a portable meter that will do a lot of our meters. But we have so much work in our meters to complete before we are really fine-tuning, and we also have to get some staff up to space. We're not ready to jump into the full meter shop. While we're completing, engineering is working very hard to complete all the new commercial meters, which will be the ones that the meter shop needs, particularly as they age. It still takes time to get all the existing ones sort of verified. We have old meters from schools and other places that very likely are probably reading a fraction of what they should, because we don't have the means to test them. And trying to take out a 8-inch meter and send out and bypass and still maintain service is not easy. So what you normally do is you have test ports on them, and you have a shop and you do those type of things. We looked at a lot of different jurisdictions, how they're doing it. We're trying to find the best practices. We're not alone. There's so many other cities that are getting into the business because everyone's mandated to have the meters now. And we're just trying to find a way that sort of fits. But we're not ready to run until we take a few baby steps this year.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Robinson.
Hi, Dave. I was under the impression that, like subsidence, in the aquifer, once it go down, it don't go back up.
That it will?
It won't go expand back
That's,
up.
I think, the common conception.
Yeah, so, it's been going down for 50 years, since agriculture. And the more they pump, I see along 99 more trees being, they put in more almond trees, and when I was living in Oakland, Berkeley, they had that big wildfire up in the hills, and everybody started trying to put the fire out, and then before you know it, you couldn't even get a drop out the hose.
Yeah.
And a lot of people lost their lives there. And, you know, I favor drip lines myself. You know, anybody can put that in, especially for your trees. And if the trees need more water, you should replace them. Put in drought-tolerant plants. You know, just be, we have a good climate. We can, think like American can-do spirit.
We do have drought rebates, too.
Yes.
Not drought, drip line rebates.
Yeah.
We should have a drought rebate.
Yeah. Councilman Hawley.
Yes. You know, I went to pay my water bill the other day, and I'm normally was paying $80-something. Now I jumped up to $125, and we at these 2-day watering week, and I watched from that point we were at from 7 to 11. Now I noticed we took off an hour, and we're still at 2 days a week. So we gave up 2 hours, plus we gave up 1 day, and yet the rate goes up. And I had several folks call me this week about their water bill jumping so high. But now we can't, and we still look at our lawns, they're still dying because we're not getting enough water into them. But we're paying a high quality now for the same service, but not getting. I'd rather see it at 3 days a week because it's going to take a while for these lawns to come back together. And now we have code enforcement going around checking folks' yards and all the dead lawns and all the dead stuff around the areas because they don't water enough. So we're losing better than we're gaining as far as our community, as far as watering. I'm not so much worried about paying the high rate if we have to pay it, but I think we should still have the option of watering 3 days a week, because 2 days a week is not going to get our yards back together. I noticed Clovis went to 3 days a week. Fresno went to 3 days a week. And we're still dying around here in Madera. But yet we got a water increase. So I don't know what we're going to do about the situation, because 2 days a week is not going to help our yards. Now when we took out a whole hour out of those days as well, because I remember it was 7 to 11 and 7 to 11 in the evening. Now it's 7 to 10. So we're losing for its watering time and as well watering days. But we're paying more on the other side of an increase in watering.
Mr. Tully.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, it's not staff's intent to be argumentative. All we're trying to do is provide you a set of options. During the drought, the saying was, brown is the new green. Now, there's a sense that for many people, the drought is over and they'd like their yard to look nice. I understand that motivation. If council wants to, it's a business decision. If the council wants to provide 3 days a week watering, we can do so. We'll see how the system tolerates it, and we'll report back to you. But it is a business decision. It's your choice. It's a business/risk decision. You have the information. I think you're in a position to make an informed decision.
Thank you, David, for that. Councilman Rigby.
Yeah, I want to thank Mr. Randall for all your hard work and giving us this information. I value it greatly. The fire flow problem, this is the first I've ever heard of it as long as I've been on council, and so that was very informative and eye-opening, and I appreciate being given that information. I'm curious, as it was brought up by Councilmember Oliver, I'm just kind of curious. I sort of applaud the efforts that have been made by constituents in Madera through conservation. I know that I've attended several parties over the summer where a lot of people have already gone drought tolerant. You had mentioned earlier, changing lawns to rock gardens and drought tolerant bushes and trees and shrubbery and whatnot. And it just seems to be cost effective, and it sort of leans towards what Councilmember Hawley is saying. There's a substantial notice in the increase of billing, and I get those same phone calls, and I have to assure the person calling me it's going to go up more. That's a fun conversation to have.
Yeah.
But I also get to allude to our efforts to begin our capital projects with water storage, and how it all leads up to the opportunity to begin to level off at some point and be able to provide a better service. I am personally curious, and I don't know if any of my other colleagues share the same sentiment, what it would look like to go to 3-day while we're still trying to work on these pumps. I will admit, I wish we would have been having this conversation in May and not in the middle of July. I think that's on us. I think we should have brought that to the table much sooner. I'm also hopeful that Well 27, that has been down for reportedly 6 years, but now you're saying possibly 8.
I don't know the exact date.
I mean, that's, these are things that I think that we need to continue just to strive to get better at. I would like to see us go to 3 days, at least till the middle of September, and then this is something that I'd like to bring back and then discuss. I'm curious where we are. I think, though, if our if our fire flow problem is substantially impacted during these peak hours, I would hope that we wouldn't wait till September to bring this back. I can see where it would be confusing to the public, however, that we go 3 days now that we're at the beginning of July, and then bring it back September and cut back to 2 days, and then bring it back again in 2018 and go back to 3 days, and then we cut it back to 2 days. I'll be honest, I'm kind of out of lull here in my head. It's pick your poison.
I certainly see where you're going. The maintain current level and review in 9 months would give us a chance to see what kind of wet weather we have in the 17-18 year, and that seems like the safe, prudent thing to do. But I also feel that same sentiment with our community, and the perception of everybody has and we don't. The comparison to Fresno and Clovis. And we have a lot of pine trees in the city that have just turned brown and red and have no tines on them anymore. So it just kind of adds to the perception that we have dry lawns and we have dead trees. And although I truly believe as well that our constituents love Madera and love where they live, and they have shown tremendous conservation efforts over the past few years in living with the drought. But I think since we are in July, it's kind of a happy medium that we're not having this conversation in April. I don't think personally that the next 90 days, 3 days a week, will hurt those conservation efforts or those repair efforts, and then we can come back either in late September or October 1 and go back to 2 days a week when the temperature is not so high, see what kind of wet weather we have, and then in the 2018 season, which I believe we normally have the conversation February, March, try to make some sort of decision by April to start in May. So I would certainly agree with that. Any other questions or concerns?
So, Member Dillon, if I heard you correctly, is
Yes.
that the direction that we're giving staff now? Is that what the council?
In agreeing with some of my colleagues and myself, that's what I would propose, is to, as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, as well as I'd like to throw this in. I know we have a great social media person to do that same social media campaign, to still show that we need to be responsible, to still show not to waste water. We still have the same restrictions in place as far as the car washes and the things of that nature. We're not going to allow any of that, open-ended hoses and things of that nature. So I think we use social media and Joseph in any way we can to send that message to our community.
I mean, I get to wash my car tonight now. Good.
Only if it's your watering day.
It is not.
Then you will not get a warning, you will get a fine. right? There are no warnings.
Bring back the ordinance.
Okay, so Mr. Mayor, we'll bring an ordinance back. We will advise, we'll bring an action back for the city council. We'll follow through on the social media as you request. There might be a reduction in enforcement activity in the interim for people who water an extra day.
That'd be wise.
For those that are watching live stream right now that just went to go turn their sprinklers on.
The term was thousands, Mayor, thousands.
Thousands.
Tens of thousands.
That's right. Dave, thank you very much for that. Item E2, council participation in a joint bipartisan workshop to discuss potential creation of an intergovernmental coalition.
Thank you, Mayor. This is just a follow-up. Madera County Supervisor Robert Poitras and County Assessor Gary Savanda came to the last council meeting and invited the council to participate in this joint workshop, which is tentatively scheduled for September. Their staff has since followed up with us, wanting to know if there's a yes or no from our council as far as participating. So this would just be to formalize that.
Well, I appreciate that, Sonia. Thank you very much. And I didn't want to speak for the council that evening, but this evening I personally would like to accept, especially because the cost is zero. And that's not what the goal is per se, but to be able to share in ideas with our colleagues across the street, I think is a wonderful idea. And I think this is something that we can continue for years to come. So I would like to participate.
Okay. It's just would be a consensus of the council.
Yes. Let's do it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council reports, starting to my far right with Councilman Robinson.
Yes, I had a lovely time at the 4th of July celebration at the park. It was very professional.
It was great.
But I think they should add more food vendors there.
Food vendors?
Yeah.
During the golf tournament or in the evening?
No, in the evening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Incorporate more vendors. There was a lot of people out there.
There was a lot of people out there, yes. You're absolutely right. It's a great time by all. Is there anything else?
No, that's all.
Thank you very much. Mayor Pro Tem Gallegos.
I would like to thank Keith for spending a few hours, not just a little bit of his time, to go through the CIPs with me because I had 100 million questions. And I walked in saying, oh, just a few minutes, Keith, and ended up being over 2 hours. So I'd like to thank him for that time he's given me to clarify a lot of information that I needed. Thank you.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up, too, because all of our staff has an open-door policy at any time, and I know we all take advantage of that. So whatever the day is or the time, they always make time for us, always have, and I really appreciate that from staff. Thank you very much. Councilman Rigby.
I'm going to take my time and remind my colleagues and those here that the 5th Annual Madera County Food Bank Dinner is coming up July 27th. The keynote speaker is our mayor, and I look forward to being there and supporting our food bank. I think that Ryan McWhorter and his team do a phenomenal job to ensure that people throughout our county, specifically our city, are given the opportunities to not only get food but also fresh produce. So I look forward to that evening.
It's always a fun event. Thank you very much for that. Councilman Hawley.
Really, I have nothing to report. Just ditto what Derek said about our extravaganza at fireworks. It was awesome.
It was.
That's all I have right now.
Thank you. Councilman Rodriguez.
Mayor Medina, we had a recent invite here for the Madera Association of Realtors to attend their results for their symposium. And I noticed that the last time we were there was quite a few of us there, so I didn't want us to run into the same scenario that we did last time in formal quorum, but maybe designate certain council members that like to attend. I'm not sure if that's something that we can do here, Brent, or not, but I think this would be the better option so that I think their intention is to have all council members to attend. Obviously, that presents a problem. And the fact that you engage in some activities that they might have that could potentially be perceived as some type of meeting taking place. But anyhow, I don't know if that's something, Brent, that we can do at this stage.
Technically, there's nothing on the agenda that really allows you to discuss it. I suppose you could. When is it?
I don't have that date.
Until September?
September something.
We could just bring back something on the 19th and just
Okay.
we'll put it on there for discussion.
Great.
So.
Thank you. And that's all I have there, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. That's a good point. I think for that last symposium, I reminded Ms. Marie that could be difficult to have more than 3 council members at any one time. She had also expressed an interest at the business extravaganza to have a booth set up by the entire city council, where again I reminded her that although we would all love to be there for the entire evening, that it just would be a violation of the Brown Act and we could not do so. So I think as individuals ourselves, we have to kind of remind ourselves, as well as those inviting us, that there's a Brown Act that we have to comply with. Mr. Tooley, you have something to add?
At the end of your reports, I have one quick reminder, so if you I'll wait, Mayor.
Okay. Sounds like we sparked something there. Councilman Oliver.
Nothing to report.
And I, too, want to say thanks to Marianne and to her entire staff for the wonderful 4th of July event we had yesterday. A lot of great comments. A lot of people showed up, as they do every year for the event. And another thank you to staff and everybody for all your diligence with our budget this year. Especially Tim, thank you very much for all your presentations. And thanks, Dave, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Glad you could make it. And with that, I will ask Brent for an announcement.
Mr. Mayor,
I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Tooley. You asked for a moment or two.
No,
I'm sorry.
I have to start with an apology. During our budget presentation, we failed to bring up the issue of the Friends of the Madera Animal Shelter. Is there any interest in revisiting that issue? Again, Mayor, you made me promise not to miss it, and now I have missed it.
No, it's my apologies. I missed it twice. I missed it at the Monday budget hearing, and the Friends of the Madera Animal Shelter reached out to me and wanted to know what the outcome was for their request of $100,000 annually. And I apologize completely that I missed it, and I promised them that this evening we would discuss it. And so thanks for helping out, Mr. Tooley, but actually this is completely on me. So I don't know, Mr. Richardson, if this is something we can even discuss at this point. It's not agendized, or it could have been balled up in the budget discussions.
Could have been. I'm a little hesitant because you've already taken action on that item and basically already approved the resolution. So it may be more prudent to bring it back at the next meeting and discuss it.
Is that okay with the council to bring it back? Again, completely my fault for missing that one a second time. Is that something you'd like to want to bring back at the next meeting, or is this something you want to bring back at possibly the mid-year workshop budget around December or so, or what?
We can bring back the next meeting. I think because they called and they asked me as well for an answer, and I didn't have one for them either.
If we've already taken action, though, on a budget and what they want to be included in, I think that it serves no purpose to bring anything back that we've already made a motion on and unanimously approved. By bringing it back, it would indicate that we are willing to reopen up something that we've already taken action on, and I don't feel like I want to compromise this council in that way.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, but you may be right in that point, but as well, it should have been brought up, and like the mayor said, it was an oversight. And I also had mentioned to him that I would have talked about it as well because it wasn't the decision made. And I don't want to overlook them just because we approved the budget. That's something that can always be ratified anyway. So let's not just assume that we don't want to discuss it. We need to give them an answer.
We could, if I may make a suggestion before we get into another in-depth discussion that's not agendized, I would suggest you could still bring it back at the next meeting, and at that time, Councilman Rigby, of course, could weigh in as you have. But you could bring it back as a discussion item as to how to handle it, and maybe even at that, not necessarily firmly agendize it for any action, but just more of a discussion item with some sort of direction to staff. Just a thought. So,
any other thoughts? I would be okay with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Tooley, for reminding me. Now, Mr. Richardson, an announcement.
All right. Mayor, the council will now adjourn to closed session in one item, that's conference with legal counsel and existing litigation pursuant to subdivision D1 of Government Code Section 54956.9 in one matter as listed in the agenda.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. If we come out of closed session and you're not here, well, then you miss. Mr. Richardson, if you would, please.
Hang on, let me get things up and running.
Whenever you're ready.
Come on. Okay, Mayor, the council met in closed session for one item that was existing litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, Subdivision D1, in one matter as listed in the agenda. No reportable action was taken.
Thank you so much, Mr. Richardson. And with that, thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.